I began to fall asleep. And as I began to fall asleep, I'd collapse to the rock and stand back up. And I realized that I was going to die here. I was never longer going to be able to fight my way. I was going to die right where I was.
Hello, Pete. This is our guest, Pete Panagore, and we are Enlighten Me. This is my brother, Adrian, and I'm Katie. And we're so happy to have you on our show today.
I'm so happy to be here, Katie. Hi, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you go ahead and share a little bit of your story?
Sure, I will. In 1980, I was a national student exchange student from Massachusetts to Montana. And come spring break, I decided not to go back to my home, but to go on yet another mountaineering adventure, as I had for most of my life. And this one, I went to Alberta and British Columbia, Canada, in March in about 10 feet of snow to go do 10 days of snow caving, backcountry snow caving, and a day of ice climbing. Now, I'd never done those two things in combination, or actually, I'd never actually done ice climbing before, but I'd done a lot of winter camping and I'd done a lot of backcountry skiing. I was well equipped and well trained, even on rock, but not on ice. And so my climbing partner, he was certified as lead ice climber, and I made a mistake in my equipment. We both knew that this was a mistake that I was making, but we agreed that I was young and strong enough to be able to make this mistake. I climbed with an axe and a hammer instead of two axes, and I could get into the details, but we can skip those. We got to the top of the climb way late because I was climbing much slower than everybody else. There were other teams on the ice that day. My climb was twice as long as all the other people, including my climbing partner who was waiting for me because my swing was short because I had a hammer, which is only like 9 inches, and an axe, which is much longer. But the length of my stride was determined by the height of my hammer. And I couldn't let go of the hammer like I could with the axe and suspend myself on a strap to rest. I had to grip the whole time. So I burned out my forearms, which meant that my climb was exhausted and slow and slower because I was exhausted. By the time we reached the top of the climb, knowing for hours that we were already in grave danger, the sun went down. The temperature dropped about 30 degrees. We had 3 rappels to get down off the ice cliff, and we were alone. So we realized immediately that we were in grave peril. Hypothermia started within minutes. We had no extra food. Well, we had water because there was ice. We could eat, and we did eat the ice. But the temperature continued to drop through the night. We fought our way across. I'll get to the near death experience. This is the kind of story that, well, hopefully it will be made into a movie, but there are movies like it where high adventure mountaineering, death defying, oh my God, it's so steep, someone's going to die kind of film. And that's exactly what it was for us. The level of my trauma from that night, excluding the actual death, was pretty extreme because I was terrified, totally terrified. And we made our way across the 3 rappels, rappelling as hypothermia continued to advance, frostbite, loss of cognition. No, the back of my eyeballs were freezing. I frostbite everywhere. It was terrible. And by the time we finally fought our way across, because there's a face we had to cross, so we would cross and drop and cross and drop, we got to the bottom of the second rappel, and we were standing on a boardroom sized table, like the kind of that big space. It's granite, and there were iron pins epoxied into the mountain with carabiners clipped in, and so we're clipped into the mountain with straps. No, we're not going to fall. It's a part of a practice route. And we're at the top of this. We're off the ice on the rock. I have the rope. We've been fighting for. I think we started the climb at just after sunup, and this was March, and so it was 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. We finally reached this place, close to 24 hours. I had the rope. We were exhausted. The cold was getting deeper into us. The cold was accelerating in its drop. My body had shifted from this position of driving myself forward for survival by my willpower to a deeper brainstem sort of original hominid a million years ago kind of survival. My body was in a survival mode that is almost autonomic. You know, you get your autonomic things, your breathing, your blood's flowing, those things. It felt like that there was an autonomic survival gene inside of me that turned on, and I was animal. I was deeply, deeply animal. And there was not a whole lot of thinking going on. There was a lot of paying attention with sharp focus for fear of death and driving forward for survival that my body was doing. By the time we were on this ledge, I was super advanced in hypothermia. And I'll say how I knew this. I was on the National Ski Patrol. I'd been skiing since I was a little tiny kid, and I'd been on the patrol since early high school. And so, and I was working at a mountain in Montana at the time as a volunteer on the volunteer patrol. So I was well versed in what my position was and where my advancements were going. I had the rope. I tied one end to my harness. I took the other end and I tossed it out around this corner that we had descended down this crag, and there was a corner to it. And I pulled on the rope. And as soon as I pulled on the rope, it jammed somewhere up above me around the corner in some kind of rock wedge and tightened. I pulled it a few inches and it just locked. And now we couldn't go up and we couldn't go down, and nobody was going to come to rescue us. And so we were now in a deadly place. And my hypothermia was advanced to the place where I got hot, which happens to hypothermic people. You feel like you're hot. You're not, but you feel like you are. And so I unzipped my coat, which accelerated the process. And I have to say, as painful as the cold was, and the cold was like sticking my hand in a hot bed of oak, that's been burning in your campfire. And as painful as that was, dying by cold wasn't so hard because I began to fall asleep. And the sleeping, it just was putting me to sleep. There was a point at which my extremities didn't hurt anymore. The cold, the pain, I was kind of beyond the pain, and I began to fall asleep. And as I began to fall asleep, I'd collapse to the rock and stand back up, and I realized that I was going to die here. This is no longer, I was never longer going to be able to fight my way. I was going to die right where I was. And when I had this realization, a peace flowed over onto me of acceptance, and I started thinking about God. I had mystical experiences as a child. There's a whole long history of mysticism that predates this in my story. So I was experienced as a child and right through high school and college, but I was still terrified. I want to make sure that you understand, this was just because I had these other experiences didn't mean that I wanted to leave. I didn't want to leave, but I had no choice. I had made my choice, and my choice cascaded into this circumstance. And so I began thinking about God, and I began thinking about my family. And I should say I was raised Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox. And that because after my near-death experience, all of my belief systems went away. Everything was gone. So I'm thinking about God. I'm thinking about my mom and my dad and my sister who had run away when I was 14, damaged my family. She was like having an ongoing death in the family that you could never really put a barrier, and so it caused a lot of pain. And then when I'd fallen asleep this last time, and as I fell asleep, I stood back up, and I had tunnel vision. And as I looked, this black form collapsed in front of my face, and it went to darkness. And as it was going to darkness, I was thinking to myself, "Am I falling asleep? This is so weird. I've never seen anything like this before." And as it went out, I thought, "Oh, I'm definitely falling asleep." And then I awoke. It went out, and I awoke, and I awoke in this way where everything in front of me was gone. Everything around me was gone. I was on the face edge of a deep velvet darkness, and I still had my body, and I was still connected to my body, but I was also not connected to my body because I had no more pain. I was outside of it, connected by which I mean I hadn't been taken from it yet. I was still next to it, and I was like a dark shade, and I had some substance to me, and I didn't have any idea what was going on. I was very confused, but I wasn't afraid, not at all. And in the far distance, and I'm going to speed through my whole near-death experience. I was there for a long time, apparently, because a lot of things happened to me. So I was collected by an angelic being, a consciousness that was entangled with the omni mind. It was one of the same and yet somehow reduced. So it was in two places at once. It collected me and took me. So it took me and fed me comfort and well-being, and I had this perception where I could see myself inside of this angelic being from the outside, but when I looked, I couldn't see me looking. I had this eye of God view of myself inside of me as I was inside of this transparent orb and could see into this darkness. So I was in two places at once, and I was greater and lesser at the same time. And then there was this consciousness, this orb, this angel being opened and popped me out into this huge galactic size womb, universe size womb of emptiness. There's absolutely nothing there. And I am not a thing anymore. I'm in a place of no thingness. I had shape and form, and this is everything I'm saying is in metaphor. I was like a huge energy ball of consciousness that was my thinking was my beingness, and I was in contentment. I knew myself as I had always been, like saying, I'm glad that's over. Now I'm back to myself again. It's like coming home after a long week, and you kick off your shoes and you relax in the chair. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is me. And I'm in this vast darkness, and it has an end to it. It is huge, but I can see that there is an edge to it, and that edge is a deeper darkness into which I cannot see. And so and all of this, I am in like the living, breathing womb of the divine being, and I know it. And out of this deeper darkness that I could see, a million light years away, I could see this edge. Out of that, out of the substance of the emptiness I was in, there was an opening, and from that opening in the darkness, light poured. And this light was gigantic compared to me, and I was gigantic compared to my human self. It was like I was, as a human self, I was like a fish, and as a soul self, I'm like the sun, and this is like the galaxy, and it's just huge, and it's two things at once. It is pure white light and simultaneously a bazillion different colors, and not just reds and greens and aquas and oranges, but all of those colors, and all of the electromagnetic spectrum, X-rays, infrared rays, ultraviolet rays, and more than that. And I can see them all because I'm not looking with human eyes, because I have no humanness at me at all. I have no humanness. There's no human thing about me, nothing clinging to me. And this light was simultaneously both. It wasn't switching from A to B. It was both at the same time, one light and a multiplicity of many lights. And they're all entangled, making this one white light. And it is enormous. And I see it, and I am seduced in a second. And as soon as I have this luscious attraction, I'm instantaneously moved toward it, and it is outpouring life. Like, I can't tell you. It is like all of the universal life. Everything it's just life itself, and it's pouring it out of itself, and I am just in desire of it. And so I touch it with my being, and as I touch it with my being, it enters into me and expands me. I'm going to shorten up here. I go through these stages. I go through a life review. I go through this place where I'm expanded into the divine being of beauty, love, truth, understanding, knowledge, where I'm almost enfolded back into the darkness. I have this experience where I'm a single photon superposition, entangled with all of these other photons. I am one of these little lights, and yet I am still outside. I saw my soul self, another level of myself. I have multiple levels of my being, and I saw the soul self of me emanating out of the darkness, everlasting, being called into being eternally. And also, I should say that I'm in this hugely humble position where the majesty of the brilliance of the being of creative life is so much more than me. I'm being done to. I'm not doing anything. And so I see this elongated soul of myself, and in the soul of myself there's a multiplicity of lives I had lived, and they were all simultaneously alive in, and none of the lives I had lived were me. They were there was my soul level, and I was this much higher self, and I got to travel into a couple of them and see inside of them. And then I was kind of shrunk back to a size where I remembered my family, and I said, what about my mom and my dad? Are they going to lose me? And that means not kid number two. And I was swept across this womb of heaven to this energy field edge where I was stuck outside. Part of me was stuck outside of it, and I could see our entirety of our universe, a quadrillion galaxies, like those James Webb telescope views that are coming out now. And my vision was swept to the origin of the universe in the now, and out of this deep greater darkness that is impenetrable to me, this infinity that I can't see within, there is this light pouring from, and this light is weaving itself like a net inside of all of the molecules of all of our universe. And I can see that inside of everything there is this weaving of light that is the creative force itself, masked beneath layers of energy and matter. And out of this greater darkness, other universes were popping out, one after the other, after the other, after the other. And the whole thing, the heaven I was inside of, the universe I was looking into, all these other universes, and the entirety of infinity projected on me as this massive, like laser beam love. I was the most beloved being in all the universes, not because I was special, but because I was made of the same substance, and I was beloved, and I was radiant with this uh, love of me. And then my vision was changed to see Earth, and Earth was like this hologram, and there were this 7 billion people, and inside of every single person was the same love. This little speck, like a gold dot, inside of everyone, but everybody's covered over by this thick veil, like a fog or a foam, and nobody can see it in each other. And the voice says to me, because it's speaking to me the whole time, and it has no language, it's not talking in words, it's speaking to me speaking right to my soul. And it says, in the way that I love you now with all of this massive love, I have always loved you. And because my eternal love for you, all is well, has been well, and will be well for everyone, because everyone is beloved the same, because everyone is made of the same substance, of the same light out of the infinite. There's nothing that is not enfolded back into the divine. There's this, and I wish I could remember where it is. It's like in the Upanishads or the Vedas or somewhere. It's where Brahma unrolls Brahma's tongue, and there's a universe, and everything is on the tongue, and then Brahma rolls back in the tongue, and everything goes back into Brahma. It's like that. It's like there's nothing lost. Everything is in the totality of the light always. And the voice then showed me my parents' faces, and I saw parallel lives for them, lives with me and lives without me. And I saw their suffering in comparison. And without me was like nuclear war. And with me, it was just, ground fighting, which was terrible, but it was better than the other. And I understood that the length of my human life was a snap of my fingers. Like there is no time there. All time, no time. And so the voice is inviting me back, and to stay. And I'm like, well, if I go back and help my parents, can I come back here? And the voice is like, yes. I say, I choose that. And knowing that my own bliss was coming, and I got sent back, and I had to make a choice of the kind of life I would live. And I got stuffed back in my body again. And I saw all of my potential futures, all at once. And then I came back an entirely different person. I everything about my life changed. I looked the same. I was kind of it was the 1980s. I was a holdout hippie. I had long hair and kind of looked the part, but I was an entirely different person.
I'd love to hear how all the changes that occurred. I also think it's very interesting how yours was a very quantum physics kind of heaven, that everyone has their own kind of story, but yours, maybe because you're into sci-fi,
I wasn't.
big
I mean, it was a little as a kid. I was, but there was this experience of it's paradoxical. It was them and one at the same time. It was and I use physics to explain it, but I had to find language to think about it. And I definitely have a science orientation. All right. I've had that my whole life. But I never could have been a scientist because I'm dyslexic and I can't freaking do math. So that was not a journey I was going to take. But I still had to construct a language for it. And I
I,
do love science fiction.
you, your ability to communicate this heavenly experience with just the words that we know as humans, just the expressions that we know as humans, you obviously put some time into thinking about how to communicate that. And I sincerely appreciate that. I have chills hearing you describe that. And and I know it must be a challenge because you have to put this into a way human could try to understand it, but it's so far beyond human.
and
No
maybe
language.
because you have had time to think about it more, like if it had just happened, you probably wouldn't be able to describe it as well. Like when it just happened, you like, probably didn't tell anyone for a long time, but you were trying to process it, I guess, and figure out how to put it into like these terms. It's
That's
amazing.
exactly.
Like you do tell it very well.
Well, thanks. That's exactly what happened. I kept my mouth shut for 20 years. It took me a long time to process, and I came back as a child. My first mystical experience when I was 5. In my 5-year-old mind, I knew that I worked for God. Like I had this transportive experience. I had this deal that I made before I was born, and that I was working. I work this lifetime. I'm working for God, and so I knew that about myself. I didn't know what that meant, and I definitely rebelled against it. I'm just saying, not a job that I really wanted in this life. And part of my NDE that I didn't mention is that I experienced my soul self being called into being, being called eternally into being. So in the now and always, and it was like there was a name. There was a name. My soul has a name. It's not a human name. I can't say it. I can't even understand it. Okay, so on the way home, I totaled the car, hit a semi. So, and then I ended up with a stutter, but we had enough money between us, and that was after we got out of jail. Okay, so we also went to jail. It's
You're saying
craziness.
after the near death experience,
Like
all
the
this,
next day, all this other stuff happened.
how
We were
did
speeding and we got pulled over and we refused to pay in because we're going to pay it when we get back to the United States, and the cop took us to jail. I mean, he's a Mountie, he took us to jail. So once we got out of jail, and then I totaled the car, and then Tim took the bus. We had enough money. It was his car and he was pretty upset. And a long story. Anyway, so he took a bus back. I was hitchhiking, starting out at sunrise to get back to Montana. I'm still in Canada, and there was this roaring sound inside of me, like bigger than the world around me, and it was a roaring, calling compulsion, unavoidable, like having tinnitus, but only it's Niagara Falls, and you're right in front of the falls, and it was telling me that I had a job to do, and the job was to communicate it. And uh, I knew that I had no language for this. How can I talk about the thing that I can't talk about? And so I was pretty upset for a very long time. And part of my change was that I was an English major, but I was going to go into the family architectural firm. Our dream as a family was to build skyscrapers. I don't know if we were going to get there in Boston, but my dad was doing well, and my sister's in grad school for architecture, and I was going, and I'd been pushing a pencil since I was a kid, and swinging a hammer too. So inside and outside. So I decided, nah, not doing that. Shocked my family and went to divinity school to study the language of contemplation and mysticism. And I did that so that I could figure out some way there must be other people in the history of the world like me, because I came back and I could see light inside of everything. It wasn't just that I had this thing that happened to me yesterday. It was a living, breathing thing inside of me, compelling me to talk about it, not giving me any language for it, and showing me light inside of everything, the pencil, the glass of water, and human beings and animals and birds and insects, anything living, like to the max, and showing me this paper thinness of reality that is so weak. And I needed help and had none. I was absolutely alone, and my perspective, I felt like I was afraid that people would think I was crazy if I ever opened my mouth. So I didn't talk about it. And because I was an English major, I love language. Divinity school, I learned the history of mysticism, and then I became a preacher in a liberal New England congregational church tradition, hiding inside the church. But my job was writing and speaking and studying. So I studied all the time anyway. I continued my mystical studies because no one's going to tell the minister not to do that. And I practiced yoga and meditation because nobody's going to tell them not to pray. So I figured out a way to carve my path inside in plain sight and not say a word about it.
So we're hearing about more and more of these stories. I mean, not in such great detail. Thank you. I'm not sure if it's happening more than near-death
Oh,
experiences. I don't think that's the case. I think more people are just sharing and more people are accepting.
all of the above, except for that more people are having them because of cardiac care. More people are talking about it. More people are accepting of it. But cardiac care, when it came online in the 1960s, they started raising the dead in ERs and in ambulances and at corporations and at McDonald's. There are paddles all over the place, and people are being brought back. There's always been near-death experiencers, but the proportion has shifted because of science.
I think we're hearing more about them because people are more open to talking about it too. So
Well, I think that's partly due to the compulsion many of the near-death experiencers have to talk about it. We didn't talk about it, but that didn't mean we didn't have a compulsion to talk about it. And so about 20 or 30 years ago, Raymond Moody, back in the 70s, 80s, he came out with his book. And then a trickle started coming out. And then maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there were more books about it. And I was kind of in that wave when I came out. I was at the front of the crest there. And then we all started talking about it. And then there's YouTube and TikTok and social media and movies and books. And I am definitely trying to bring it into the public square.
in my world, it's there.
Yeah.
I
And you're
feel-
doing a great job
Yeah.
with being able to express it so
Yeah.
so clearly. It sounds clearly to me, but to you, you're probably still like, there's probably a gap still. You're probably still like, I'm trying to explain it, but still you have no idea unless you experience it, I'm sure.
It's like that. Except for this. Okay, so there is this other part of it. The other part of it is that the language. So let me talk about classical music. If you've ever listened to Bach, Bach was a super religious person. He was a mystic, and he could take his own interior emotions and experience of his mysticism and put it in the music. And when you're sitting in the concert hall and somebody's wailing on the organ, you can hear this in his music. You can see it in paintings. You can hear it in poetry. So there's always been this capacity of humanity to alchemize it into a form. But the form sort of rides on this spirit energy. And so the spirit energy, the way that it actually communicates itself is it speaks its own language, and people hear it because they have it in them, because everybody does, except for that some people have it more veiled than others. But the light sees itself, it talks to itself. And so a large part of my pursuit I'm a Kriya yogi and a centering prayer person, and for all my life. And the large part of my practice has been learning to try to weave it inside of the words so that it can speak to your heart, and you can then Together, it's a multiplier. So when it travels between microphone and camera, and I worked in television for 15 years at a show up here in New England, and I discovered accidentally, and it was that I could project it through the microphone and the lens onto tape, so that it would sit on this tape and then get played, in the morning, and that helped me understand, because I could feel it interpersonally anyway. There's an energy that is perceptible, that can be practiced and honed for accuracy, especially when one steps out of the way, one's own egoic self steps aside again and again and lets it be its own energy, and then it communicates itself. And so all of this is swinging back to around the language. So my whole hope in all of this was to be able to use language to create a space for the experience of a touch of the taste of the divine, so that people could feel it inside themselves. Once you feel it inside themselves, then you know that it's there, and you don't need people like me. All you need is this thing inside you.
Do you have any tips for us to hone in on that? There's always like breathing techniques or whatever, or
Well, I was raised Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic, and I even was part of, I don't know if you know, the Navigators and the Campus Crusade for Christ. I touched into all those things.
yeah,
And you grew up what?
Catholic also. We have a big family. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Nice. I went to Catholic high school and all
Oh,
boys school.
we went to a
And
little bit of private school.
oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
cool. And when I read Jesus there, because we had to read Jesus gospel every year, he was a different guy when I came back and read him again. It's like, wait a minute,
You're
he's like
translating everything
me.
different. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Now I completely lost what we were going to talk about. I went down
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry.
No, 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 it's great.
You did mention something earlier that I would love to hear more about. You said something to the effect that you made a deal with God or the creator before your birth.
Oh, yeah. The pre-birth plan.
Yeah. Could you elaborate
Yeah.
on that? I find that fascinating. Do we all? Well, first of all, tell us your perspective. 'Cause I'm wondering, yeah, is that what we do?
Oh, you said at 5 years old, you knew. And then also, I guess when you came back from that near death experience, it was more apparent, but you were still hiding from it, right?
I did my best. I felt like I accepted a role that I didn't really want. Maybe I wanted on the other side, but not so much on this side. So I had a series of mystical experiences from childhood on. And the very first one that happened, I was 5 years old, and my sisters went to Catholic school. They went to the local Catholic school with boys and girls, but I was in kindergarten, and so I decided that I would wait in the maple tree and jump down and scare them when they got off the bus, because they're my big sisters. So I'm sitting up in this maple tree, and it's September, and the leaves are two-tone green, and they're flicking back and forth in the breeze, and I get mesmerized or sort of hypnotized by this. And as I'm mesmerized by this, I sort of quiet, 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 and then suddenly I'm peaceful, and then there's this huge roar behind me, like a jet engine suddenly appears behind me, and this roar enters into me and then just takes me. It snatches me out, and I'm pulled out of my little tiny body and raced up through the tree, up to the top of the atmosphere. And I could look down, I could see the tree and the house, and I'm outside of my body. I can see I can't see the boy in the tree at this point. I can later, but at this point I was like, there's a tree. What am I doing up here? And I get sucked up, and we get to the kind of the exosphere, the top of the atmosphere, and instead of going into space, it transforms into this greater darkness. And this greater darkness is like the same space that I was in before, and I'm inside of this angelic being, this orb of consciousness, which is transparent. And I have a light body. I still shaped like a boy, but I have no molecules, and I can see down this like an elevator shaft into the boy. I can see the boy, and he's down there, and I'm up here, and I know that he's not me. That I know that this is me, and so I'm here in this containment space, and the darkness is alive, and it opens up the bubble that I'm in, and it enters in, and as it enters in, it takes 10,000 different forms. It's just changing and changing and changing. And there's sort of like a countertop between us. There's a barrier of some kind, but it's only half a barrier. And it's speaking to me, and it says to me, you work for me. You made a deal. Don't forget, now remember. And then it pulled me out of this space and put me into the dark void where I remembered myself and understood this immense ocean of wisdom, this ocean of contentment. And then I was put back in the bubble again and sent back down to my boy self. And I hopped out of the tree and I decided that I was going to be a priest because I was a Catholic kid. And I went and I told my mom, and the story goes on from there. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but I know that I was always, my dad said, after my near death experience, years later, and this is like only, my dad died 3 years ago. And before he died, I said, "So, Dad, what do you remember after?" Because my parents didn't really, my dad especially didn't really believe me. And my mom was still kind of, which is par for the course. So I said, "Dad, what was I like when that summer that I came home?" He said, "Well, you were always a compassionate kid. You were always a little bit different than the other kids. You're always a little more compassionate. But when you came back, you were like way too compassionate. It was just way too much." Now, he didn't put it quite that way, but that's what I got. And so I know that even as a kid, it transformed me. And every single time I've had these mystical experiences, including my NDEs, I I get transformed. I become a different person. And people who have Kundalini awakenings, they know what I'm talking about, because you have this thing blow up inside you where now you know that this isn't real and that you are this other thing, and you are come back a transformed person. And it brings as much trouble as it does goodness. It's not a cakewalk.
So it's like internal turmoil, kind of also. And sometimes I have heard just a lot of things go wrong during that period because it's almost like God's testing you, or maybe it's hard for it to come out and something's trying to keep it from coming out, maybe. I don't
Oh,
know.
I was the one trying to keep it from coming out.
Okay.
I zipped my lips shut for 20 years. But I couldn't help, but it was spilling out all over me. Like, so when my book came out, the last book came out, I went to speak at this church where I had been the associate minister right out of divinity school. And all the youth groups came to my talk. This is like 20 years later, and the church is packed and a bunch of them show up, and we always had a good time. And they said, "We always knew there was something you weren't telling us. You
You
were
have a
you
secret.
Yeah, you had a secret." And my behavior was not like any minister they had ever met in their lives or since. Barefoot in the pulpit, working with the homeless, absolutely. Well, they got to witness one of my after effects is courageousness. My my ministry has taken me into places where danger has been a normal part of my life. And my wife was so glad when I went into television. Thank God that's over. It involved, I was the victim of a lot of violence. I was in the presence of violence. There was a lot of things around that never, ever once weakened my conviction in the interior world. There's nothing that can take this away from me. There's no thing, not even death can take it away from me. So I live my life with this constant knowledge of my own transcendence, my own temporariness, and it makes it, well, I get to feel good about having fun, for one thing, and enjoying my as much as my life as I possibly can. I'm not driven to be a workaholic, although I am a workaholic. I work all the time. I only have one boss. I've only ever had one boss. I work for God, and I work hard for God.
Somebody else I heard his story, he said he came back and he really didn't want to like do his normal job. And so his wife was like, kind of like, what's going on here? Like, you're not wanting to like do you're not caring about money anymore is really the situation. Yeah. And you
Yep.
just care about a lot of different things that don't have to do with like making money and paying bills. So it was a turmoil there when they came back from dying. So I'm sure that there's a lot of like dark night of the soul when you come back, almost wanting to go back to heaven,
I
and you have
definitely
to be a
wanted to go back. I definitely did not want to be here. I prayed for my death every single day. every day for 20 years. But I also practiced Kriya Yoga, which is you asked, that's what you asked. Any tips? So
Breathing. Yeah.
I stumbled into Paramahansa Yogananda and the autobiography of a yogi, and also the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. And right after I died, and I became a Kriya yogi. I've been practicing Kriya Yoga for 40 years because Yogananda, who said it was the fastest route to spirituality, and it's totally worked for me. The main tip I can tell you is that if you practice techniques of mindful focus with language or body and breath to eliminate attachment to the monkey mind and images and imaginations and memories by learning to be in a singular focused space. In that space, visited 10,000 times, the natural artesian well of your soul will erupt with the presence of the divine simply by stepping aside and not being attached. I practiced this for 40 years before I started teaching it, which I began teaching 3 years ago in a private group. And I didn't know whether other people were going to be able, whether it was going to impact other people like it impacted me. And I decided not to tell anybody about it, that I was practicing. My wife didn't even know I was doing this. That's what my yoga practice was. I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to be a fool and say that, I'm developing energy space inside of me.
Well,
I waited till people in my community where I live in the same town where I'd been the minister. My ministry was dramatic enough to make the statewide paper on a regular basis involving terrible things, and not that I did, but that I was in the middle of. And so my town knew me. My town, where I live, they still know me. They still accept me. And I waited until for 40 years until people started to tell me that I glowed.
is
That
this what this
when after I had this heart attack in 2015, I died again. And after that
had
heart
to be a
attack,
show off and do it again?
well, that's what my publisher said. He's like, well, I won't tell you what he said because I shouldn't say this one. It was funny,
Like,
but
look at
also
what I
true.
can do.
Right. And so I waited till it became evident among people that I knew. So I used to go to these yoga classes here in my town and the vinyasa flow. And one of the teachers one day told me that we all want you to come to a class because whenever you're there, the energy of the room is totally different. It's like you have this presence. And so when she told me that, and some other people, I wasn't like probing people. It was just people telling me after my heart attack. I decided that I would try to see if other people if I could teach other people Kriya Yoga and whether it would work. And now, 2 years into it, we know that it does. And so the tip is to start a single practice, keep a single mantra, train your mind to stay in a single place and allow non-attachment to occur naturally. And it creates an interior space for the radiant being to live inside you, creating a bubble of heaven, not solving problems, but making safety and security, contentment and bliss, lived experience during the tumultuous times of life. And
You break that down into tiny steps because in my mind, I just can't grasp what you mean exactly. Like, what would be the first step? Somebody said counting your breaths, just counting your breaths because it's hard to blank out your mind. So just
can't.
count your breaths, and eventually you're going to get to a space where you're like, oh, my mind just went somewhere.
So you can't stop your mind from thinking. So so use use the thing your brain is good at thinking to stop it thinking. And so repeating, counting your breaths is a way to do it. Picking a color and repeating that color over and over and over again. And whenever your mind wanders, come back to that chant. I mean, that's what the monks and the nuns were doing with the rosaries. They're like they are using these singular prayers and using their physical form to control their thoughts in order to empty themselves of themselves in order for the space to develop. So super simple. Feet flat on the floor. I like to put my hands in this shape, feet flat on the floor, spine straight. I'm going to sit back a little bit, pull my mic with me. I breathe into my belly. I expand my belly. I pause. I breathe out my nose. focus. I listen to my breath. I feel my breath, and I attach to it my chant. And my chant, I use the Jesus prayer. If I had not been a Christian, if I wasn't trying to hide in the Christian church, I probably would have used a whole bunch of different words you can use. Any prayer of your childhood will do. So I breathe in, I concentrate my mind on my word with my breath, and then I repeat. And if you get bored, it's because you're not actually doing it. If your mind wanders, you come back to your prayer, back to your breath. There's no boredom in the place where the mind is focused in breath. There's no boredom there because there's no self there. So the self can't be bored if it's not present. And so this repetition, I describe it as, do you guys have dragonflies where you live? Okay, so
Oh, do
so
we?
oh, do you? It's like holding, and they're huge. Well, you have to have biceps though to do this. Then it's like riding a dragonfly on your palm. You can't grab this thing; it'll land on your palm, but if you try to grab it, it's going to fly away. So you just ride your word, your prayer chant, your mantra, on your palm, your mental palm, which is your breath, up and down and up and down, and don't grasp it. Don't try to hold it tightly because the whole process is to be quiet with it, to allow it to sit on your hand, put your mind, put your breath and your word together gently and ride them up and down. And whenever your mind wanders, just return to it. It's an inclined slope on this. I'm going to grab a chopstick. It's an inclined slope on this, but it can be a slow slope. It can take a while. It's a lifelong thing, but then it kind of starts to curve upward because what you're doing is you're training your brain, the neuroplasticity of your brain. You're rewiring your brain with mental focus. So you're taking control of your thoughts and making them singular. And what happens as your brain rewires is that the first thing that disappears is the meaning of the words. So pretty soon, you're not thinking about the number 5. It has no meaning. It just is a thought that isn't connected to anything, and then the word falls away, and then you're just left with breath, and you kind of run between these stages. And also you can get below, feeling your breath as well, but it's a process of learning to hyper focus, to quiet oneself, and the natural result of this is the presence of the divine, who you already are, because it's already golden light inside you. All you're doing is getting out of the way. And it's not just the Yoga Sutras from 3,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago. It's Meister Eckhart in Germany. It's the rabbis at the West Wall. It's the Sufis dancing. They're all doing the same thing. Some are using, for the yogis, some are using their bodies in place of language by doing asanas, feeling your physical form and running your breath through your body with your mind, feeling your muscles, feeling your skeletal structure, relaxing this, tensing that. It has the similar impact because it takes language away and focuses the mind on a singular point. And it's that singular point where, as Jesus was like the master of singularity, make your eyes single and your body will be filled with light. That's what this is. And it's not sexy. It doesn't intend to create anything. It's a subtraction process. Is that too much?
No, that was
Oh,
good.
that's perfect. That's great.
Yeah, I like that you related the rosary to meditation and yoga and all that, because it's all really connected. We're all doing the same thing. It doesn't matter what religion you are, we're all doing the same thing. And we're all trying to get to the same point, the same place.
All religions were started by mystics, and all mystics had the same problem. They couldn't say what happened to them. And so they said it in the context of their culture and their language. And from those individuals, all these religions grew.
So as you learn these practices and teach others these practices, I imagine you're able to connect with a lot more people. And I say that because as you're telling the story, I would think it would be very frustrating when you first come back, in that, who can I share this with? Who can relate? Who can understand this? But it seems like meeting other people who have had NDE experiences, I imagine that's fascinating. I would love to hear what that was like when you connect with people, or someone who had an experience. Did you have some similarities? Did you have some differences? I imagine everybody has their own unique vision when they go to the other side. But I'm very curious about what's similar and what might be different.
When I first came back, I had no peers. There was no internet. I didn't know what happened to me. I had no name for it. So I went to divinity school to study the history of mysticism. And I discovered that all these ancient mystics were like me, different languages, different cultures, different contexts, but their experiences were very similar to mine. I was alone with this until I went to my first International Association for Near Death Studies conference back in like 2016. That's when I found other people like me. Until that point, I was alone. I not 100%. I came out in my community here, and there's 5 or 6 people in my town who are near death experiencers, and we became a group of friends. But it wasn't until I went to IANS where I found International Association for Near Death Studies, where I found people like me. And it was at one of these conferences a year or so ago where I heard the presentation of a paper from the Bigelow Foundation gave $1 million prize to researchers in near death experience, and it was broken into large sums of money, and the prize winner, I think his name is Lovejoy, in his paper, scientific papers, in his paper, he said 70% of near death experiencers use 2 words in particular: love and light. And those are the 2 that I came back with primarily. And so the vast majority of us have this similarity of love and light experiences. Now everybody has their own. All through history, all mystics, all of them, Ezekiel, Elisha, Isaiah, the Patanjali, everybody has their own mystical experience. Everybody, all the way through history. And that's true now. And I don't know this for fact. I think that this is true. Because I know of the compassionate nature of the divine gave me the experiences I need to develop into the person that I've become. I think that all of our experiences are bespoke, because when we come back with these experiences, we then live a life in a particular way, and not only are they bespoke, they're often translated through the brain in a cultural context that we can comprehend. So, for instance, I went to a place of no thingness, and when I came back, I had a memory of being there, but my body wasn't there. Memories are stored in the brain, right? We know that, and that they're stored in the brain. I didn't have a brain when I was there, and yet somehow I had this connectivity to it. And through my brain, through the veil of my brain, the experience, now much reduced, say it was 100%, now it's like 1% comes back with me, some number like that. I get this little tiny trickle into me that is then filtered through my head and my life. And so what happened to me on the other side has that first filter, and then the language filter follows that. It's so there are differences, there are similarities, there seems to be multiplicity. There's that word again. I use that 3 times. I got to change it. There seems to be a whole bunch of different heavens that people experience, but they all have this unity. It's very similar to irises. Everybody's got their own iris, but everybody sees pretty similarly. There's some variation, but it's kind of like that.
Do you think that you're breaking, like, little bits of the experience come to you at different parts in your life when you need it? Like maybe you don't remember it in the beginning, and then little parts just kind of like open up to you as you need that lesson, or you are
Yes,
able to take that lesson.
absolutely yes. And ongoing. And so when I saw my parents and their parallel lives on the other side with me and without me, I saw their deaths. I saw their deaths, and I saw the whole wellness of their being, just like I was, whole and well. And that the length of their life, like the length of all of our lives, snap of the fingers. And if I just wait a moment, they'll be here. But didn't remember that part. I didn't remember seeing their deaths until my dad died 3 years ago. My dad
Mm.
died 3 years ago. It was a terrible death, which sometimes can happen. Old elderly people cascading physical problems. And it was horrifying, poor fellow. And then like a week later, he came to me in a dream. And he was 45 years old with his black beard and his black rimmed glasses from the 70s and looking good and dressed in his he was an architect. He's dressed in a bow tie and a button down and sticking his head out through the sunroom door, radiating love to me, a wellness of being. And then I remembered, oh yeah, right. I saw him after, and I had to experience that light that he brought to jog the remembrance of my previous seeing. Lots of stuff like that. Heck,
Wow.
this being in front of my body is something that I'm just when I first die, I'm deciphering that now. And there's another place I can't quite see into, and that's where this transition between where the angelic being carried me, and I was suddenly in this womb the size of the universe. I don't. There's this space. I don't know what happened, and I can't see it. And I know that I left so much knowledge behind. I have this strong. I understood. I understood the structure and the design and the build and the materials of the whole universe. I wanted to know that, and I knew it. I didn't understand what made that happen. I couldn't get into the infinity, but I understood everything. It was crazy, and I don't understand anything anymore.
It's so sad that that's what everyone says. They learn all the secrets of the universe when they're there, and then they forget it as soon as they come back. Like you wake up from a dream and you forgot that dream.
But maybe it would be a paradox if we did.
Oh yeah,
Maybe
it would be bad.
it would be, yeah, like, yeah, crazy movie, like, yeah,
And your ego would just go crazy.
probably.
Oh,
Came back with all
can we talk about ego for a second? There's this crazy thing
We
that happens is in the presence of the ultimate, there is humility because it is so magnificent that when one comes back, it can leave an indelible mark of its size in proportion to my own. And so there's humility that comes back, humility and compassion, kindness, and a whole bunch of other stuff too, confusion, lostness, all sorts of other stuff too. But this humility is this universal throughout the literature and mysticism. The mystics who are of a higher order, the oneness mystics like the Buddha, like Jesus, humility is a component of their lived experience. And that translates into compassion because I could be suffering like you. I am suffering like you.
That's interesting. I wanted to ask you, did you bring back any gifts or did you uncover gifts that you were given from the near
Tons,
death?
tons and tons and tons, and always something new. The most troubling thing is the electromagnetic problem. Things shut off, lights turn on, radio waves get interfered with. I got hit by lightning. I was a mile from the frickin' storm and the bolt hit me. All sorts of weird things like that. But in terms of psychic things, I have pursued the oneness of being and let the psychic experiences express themselves. I'm not in pursuit of my psychic abilities. I'm in pursuit of the oneness of being. And by pursuing the giver, not the gifts, I still get a lot of gifts because I'm after the giver. And so I live sort of dislocated in time because when I came back, I went through this field of probabilities, and this probability field were all the lives I could live through all the choices I could make. And there were tens of millions of choices. And so all of those, I experienced all of those as probabilities. And now I live sort of in this constant state of deja vu. Just before things happen, I have a memory of them happening. And sometimes it's more intense, sometimes it's less intense. So it has this sort of a waveform to it, ups and downs. I know stuff about people. I see into people. I have a huge BS meter, like off the charts BS meter. I can tell artifice and superficiality and lying in an instant. There's something about it. And I use my listening skills that I learned through my professional life through the lens of my heart. And I hear inside of people and I'm able to help them in a pastoral counseling sort of way that's beyond what I should be able to do given what I know. I came back with courage. Like I said, my wife was really glad when I got out of ministry because it was always drama, like huge drama. I sometimes have vision dreams. I sometimes travel out of my body, although I'm not trying to do that. It just happens. I've had encounters with darkness, bad darkness, not just like nighttime, the lights are out kind of darkness, bad things. I think my biggest after gift is the presence of the divine itself. I found that the only thing that ever gave me solace in the world was the continued pursuit of the reconnection. And the more I pursue the reconnection, the greater my capacity is for caring. And I'm still a human being. I still make mistakes. You know, you ask my family, ask my kids, they'll tell you. So it's not like the perfection I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the biggest gift I got when I came back was the pursuit of the light itself, because from that, all things come. And I can't emphasize that enough in terms of spirituality, because it's easy to be distracted by the baubles of spirituality, the powers that one can wield. I feel energy in people. I feel it in trees. I can move it outside myself. I can give it away. Not everybody can receive it because not everybody sees. So it's not like I'm doing it on my own. I'm not. It does it, and I'm just stepping aside. I'm really good with plants. That was
It
a
looks
that
like it.
Yeah,
I
I'm
see
really
some
good with
plants
plants. I
behind you.
do. It's a thing that came back with me. And I came back with a quickness. Now I'm getting older. I'm in my 60s, and I'm not as quick as I used to be. But as after my near-death experience, I like had a spidey sense when people threw stuff at me. I could duck and move and grab, and
Whoa,
and
that's cool.
that was kind of cool. And my roommate, who's still a really dear friend of mine, I knew him growing up, and we were roomies after this happened. He used to throw stuff at me all the time. The year after my near-death experience, we shared a room in Robert Frost's old house. That's where Robert Frost, the poet, we were in Robert
Wow.
Frost's old house in Amherst, and he would throw pillows at me, round up paper, shoot paper clips at me, all sorts of stuff, and just to see if I could get out of the way or catch it.
Maybe that's a sign that we're all close to God if we can dodge everything.
It was a
Yeah.
weird thing. I don't
Probably
know.
a good idea.
Right after this, I'm going to throw something at Katie.
Yeah,
Just
we're
see
gonna
what you
take
do.
Make sure her
Close.
back's turned.
Boom. Wow.
That's funny.
So do you feel that you're clear on your mission, or do you feel like your mission is always continually unfolding? Always
Oh,
kind of evolving?
it's both of those things. So the mission is singular. It's the expression of the divine presence. That's my mission. But how it's manifested has been a whole lot of different ways. There's been large blocks. I mean, I was a divinity student. And when I was a divinity student, I worked in certain field placements, and then I was a minister. And in that large block, I had a lot of ways of expressing it. And then I was in television, and in television, I used language and media. And now I'm here. But it's always the same stream that's running through. I have a through line, and the through line is love. It's divine love and light, and the expression of it. And however it manifests itself is what happens. I get directed. So I get guidance, but it's not like the angel sitting on my shoulder telling me to make a left turn. I got recruited to a whole bunch of things. I got recruited as a teaching assistant in a philosophy department at another college. I got recruited to my first job out of divinity school as a minister. I got recruited to television jobs. Things just happen. And also I get blocked. Like if I'm trying to do something and it's not, I get blocked and blocked and blocked. And then I turn in a different direction. So the guidance is ongoing. And I find that by leaning into the light, since my primary mission for myself, which is the same as interiorly as exteriorly, which is to lean into the light in my interior, I find that no matter what I do and where I go, all things pretty much work out for the good, even if they're terrible for a time. And that happens. The mission itself is the communication of the divine presence. I've always tried to show that I'm not needed. In ministry, a good minister realizes that the church will be there after they go, and the best minister tries to work her or himself out of a job and empower the people to find inside themselves what they need. And that's really what I'm after here. I'm after trying to help bring this to the public square, and risking I kept it a secret partly because I didn't want to lose my profession or my family or friends thinking I was, Looney Tunes. And my bringing it to the public square is part of what I'm doing now. But what I'm really trying to do is help people find it inside themselves. If you can develop a spiritual practice, which is important, knowledge and learning is really valuable, but you can't think your way into God. That is not possible to the mind, the overmind, whatever you want to call it, the beloved book. You can't think your way into it. Practice really makes a huge difference. And you might have a Kundalini awakening, or you took a large dose of psilocybin and had this end of duality experience. But unless you cultivate that, it'll grow on its own anyway. But if you cultivate it, it will grow faster and stronger. I found my way by aiming my life back at the light. That's how I found my way in the world. I sort of back-footed myself into heaven. I don't know if you put your weight on your back foot and then your front foot can dance a little bit better. And then my front foot's in the world, my back foot is in heaven. And I found that when I was front footing, I was like I was stepping on all banana peels with olive oil. And I was just like not capable of standing up on my own.
So keep our back feet in heaven. That's a good
That's
tip.
right. That's
Got
right.
it.
Yes. Next time I go out dancing, that's exactly what I'm going to think. A little banana peel in the front. Yeah, exactly. I think I already did that, actually.
Yeah, you got that.
Part of why we do this is I think we feel more tapped into everything you're talking about. For one thing, like not being afraid of death. I mean, it's just like it's something actually sounds very exciting
Yeah.
now.
Looking forward to it.
And to be able to tap into tranquility and peacefulness and divine and this supreme divinity and interconnectedness. Whenever we interview people, especially people who can communicate it so well, it helps us. And I'm just curious, for our audience, for the people watching, what few simple steps do you think you might advise they take next if they want to tap into all of this as well? Would it be to follow up with you and your, additional advice that you have? Or what are some simple next steps that you can provide?
My website is peterpanagore.love. All my links are there. I teach a variety of things. I run a meditation group on Mondays and Wednesdays live. On Tuesdays, I run a Kriya Yoga class that's on Zoom, and it also goes up by audio recording. I, I have a specialty in counseling people who've had spiritually transformative experiences help adjust themselves to the world. I did it by myself forever, and I found tools along the way. Plus, I was a pastoral counselor because I was a minister. If you have something that you're trying to work through, I can help you do that. Empower you. I'm all about the empowering of the other person. I'm not trying to make dependents. I'm trying to make empowered people or help people become empowered and find a way to integrate into the world, because it's very difficult to integrate into the world with these huge transformations that happen to us. The simplest thing, though, is love people. That's it. Just try to be kind. And a meditative life where one practices stepping aside from one's egoic self creates a milieu inside yourself for non-reactivity to circumstances. So you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off and you get a little road rage happening. If you can not react, instead go back into the quietude, you can change your life and the lives of the people around you. And if you can't do that, that's not needed. Just simply be a loving person. Love the people you love to the best you can. That's it. Because that's the only treasure there is here that translates. That's all I brought back with me during my life review. I brought back all the suffering I had caused, but that was all obliterated by the divine fire of love. But I brought the real treasure I brought back was love. Love I gave away, love that was given to me.
Beautiful, simple, straightforward. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very inspirational to hear all these stories. Whenever you tell people that you love to hear about near-death experiences, I don't think they understand sometimes But whenever they listen to a few of them, I know that they have to be inspired. That's how I feel. I'm just inspired to be better and to be kinder people, like you said.
Doesn't take much. This is a very temporary place. We're all passerbys here. And there is an accumulation of treasure in heaven, and it's called love. And it's worked on here. It's, well, the divine is only love. That's what it is. And it's not romantic love. There's a portion of it that's romantic love, or puppy love, or love of nature. Those are all aspects of it. It's so much greater than that. And one last thing before we go. You mentioned not being afraid of death. And I was telling my wife she knew early on that I wasn't afraid to die. And once I came out of the closet, the NDE closet, I was like, yeah, I'm not afraid to die. And then I died. And so on the day that I died in 2015, I was not afraid. I was like, it was a good day for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. I get to go home today. I didn't know that when I got out of bed this morning. And so it turned out I really wasn't afraid. I knew I wasn't, but then the evidence was, no, it's a good day.
I guess your work wasn't done, so you came
No.
back again.
I came back again for my granddaughter this time.
Oh.
I don't know why I get choices. Not everybody gets a choice. And ultimately, nobody gets a choice. Everybody goes home. Nobody stays here for good. Not yet. Unless there's technology that's developed that happens with. But I chose to come back knowing that
I'm
I
sure
get to
your
go back
family was
home.
relieved that you came back.
My wife was ready the second time. I told her before I was in the ER and I had an hour and a half drive down to the catheterization lab. I was like, yeah, like, love you, but
I might be going. I might bail this time.
yeah. But she didn't believe me, apparently. That's weird.
They prayed you back.
Yeah.
This is the perfect conversation. I don't want this to end. I keep learning new things, but maybe we end it here and maybe we meet again sometime. Don't leave anytime soon, because I would love to hear how things evolve and what other revelations you have because of these experiences later in life.
Third time's a charm. No, but I promised my granddaughter I'd stick around here as long as I can.
That's good. Plus, you have a lot more work to do, I'm sure. You have
Oh,
a
I
lot more,
do.
a lot more interviews to do.
And I'm trying to make a movie. We're working hard on that. And I've been working on it for 4 years, and I'm trying to reach the mass market. It's all about the same communication of what we talked about. The mass market is where it's at, I think.
Well, we'll be there in the front row, opening day.
Cool.
All right, brother. This has been a great experience. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for sharing your experiences.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Katie. Good to touch my heart with yours today. I could feel it.
It's a great feeling.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.